You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to Rethreading Madness.
When I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do, when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and today I'm speaking with Alan Murdock, who has practiced Soto Zen, and he's going to tell us what that is, as opposed to other forms of Zen in a moment. Since 1992, he is a survivor of child sexual abuse, and he has experienced both positive and negative impacts of meditation and mindfulness. Currently, he is serving on the practice committee at the Cedar Rapids Zen Center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And professionally, he's a creative consultant and videographer and is the founder of Murdock Media Production. So welcome, Alan, to the show. Thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us about this important topic. So tell us what Soto Zen is.
Sure. Soto Zen is a sect of Zen that started in Japan. It was brought from China by Dogen Zenji, and it focuses on the breath meditation as the primary focus of Zen practice. There's other forms like Rinzai Zen that uses koans, which are enigmatic questions, and students work on solving those enigmatic questions during their meditation. In Soto, the focus is to sit upright, be present, and generally people focus on their breath while they're meditating, and they allow their mind, thoughts can come and go, but the objective is to establish a sense of presence in the reality of right now.
It's an interesting thing, that concept of right now. I've never been successful doing that. I always am feeling like I'm constantly merged with, my ancestors all the way forward to how my life goes forward and impacts the people coming after me. And so the idea of narrowing my life down, or even my thoughts down to one moment, it always seems so impossible. I'm never good at meditation at all. Mindfulness I can do, but meditation I suck at completely. Is that being able to do that something that well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe mindfulness is still the same thing as getting down to one point of time. Correct me. Tell us, what's the difference between mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, I think in Zen practice, a lot of the mindfulness practices that are taught in therapeutic settings kind of come out of this meditation. So the idea of being mindful is that we slow down and we experience things as they are, and we take care with our actions, and we take care with what it is that's going on right now and the way that we're working in the world. And so, people could eat mindfully, they could wash their dishes mindfully, they could, rather than fretting about, our fears and hopes and dreams and like what we want to make happen and all the, those struggles, slowing it down, I think is kind of the objective of mindfulness. So it comes out of Zen practice. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
So what's the benefit of slowing it down?
I think the objective of slowing down is, I can put it, I have a friend and colleague who I practice with who is a part of 12-step programs, and he describes having been in chaos, where his knee-jerk reaction was the only thing that drove him. And so slowing down allows him to um, take stock and have a moment, a pause before he takes an action to consider, to just get a sense of like, how do I feel in this? How do I feel right now? And is the response that I'm having, is that going to be a fruitful or not fruitful response? Um, and I think for all of us, that is, that can be an important part of, you know, figuring out how to not be harmful in the world.
Hmm. And my experience of my own knee-jerk reactions is rarely are they the right thing. Rarely in that moment do I respond. If it's a knee-jerk response, am I responding from clarity or consideration or thoughtfulness or compassion? It's usually out of fear or anger.
Mhm.
For me, I don't know about other people, but that's what's true for me.
I think another component of mindfulness that people talk about is grounding.
Mm.
And I think the idea of grounding is, that if I feel pulled around by the world around me, if I feel anxiety or I'm anxious, that if I put my feet on the ground or my hands on the table and I really just, get connected with the somatic tactility of the real world, that maybe the world of the mind, um, we can put that in some context in relation to things that are around us, and we can use our senses to do that. We can, use our eyes to see that the wind is just blowing the leaves a little bit. We can use our hands to feel, a physical thing, or our feet to feel the ground, or our butt sitting in the chair, Uh, so I think that is another component that a lot of people talk about in terms of mindfulness, and tools that people can use to slow down.
Yeah, I think, we have a lot of words that, get pumped around mental health. Um, and as you're talking, I'm thinking of grounding, how many times we talk about, get grounded, or we don't ever actually describe what that is. And you just did that. So thank you for doing that. I think if somebody has never been grounded, just saying, we need to find some grounding, that somebody may not actually know what that means or where that goes or what that feels like. So thank you.
Yeah.
So the benefits of meditation, in terms of mental health, what would you say that they are?
I think that the objective of all of these practices, well, let me step Soto Zen, take a step back with Soto Zen, and I'm going to focus on the mindfulness components first, because those do come out of this practice. And I think the components of mindfulness, the benefits are slowing down, taking stock, um, having a moment of contemplation. In general, meditation is considered to be a kind of contemplative uh, religious practice. And some people have found parallels between Catholic monasticism and Zen monasticism. Um, so the idea within a secular world is that we take on little moments of that, and we allow that to inform how we go about doing things. So, in the workplace, some workplaces will bring in, somebody to teach breath meditation or mindfulness or slowing down. And the idea within the workplace is that, then people can be a little bit more calm. If you're doing sales calls and you're stressed out about your numbers and you're, trying, all of a sudden you're not interacting with that person on the other end of the line as a real person. And if you can slow things down and just interact with them, that can be a much more positive experience both for you as an employee and for them. Um, that could be twisted to become the idea that, oh, well, if all the employees are calm, we can increase their goals and put more pressure on them, which would
Ouch.
be turning that toward the negative.
Right.
But I think there's other components of just as a person in the world, the components of, if I'm anxious and grounding or mindfulness allow me to say, oh, hey, if I sit here and just feel what anxious feels like, maybe anxious starts to change. And maybe because it's changing, I can see that it's transient and isn't going to hold me down for the for if I can take that moment, things will change. And as somebody who had asthma, they taught us to do a little bit of this instead of just hitting your inhaler right away. Get a sense of your breath and you know is your chest getting tighter because you're anxious because an asthma attack started, and if you can take the anxiety edge off, you can allow your breathing to be what your breathing is, and maybe you need to use less medication because of that for this lung condition. So I think there's some benefit in apply what I'll call this is applied mindfulness, and that application could be in many walks of life. Those are a few examples of that.
Mhm. I've heard that, and I could be wrong, that meditation and mindfulness can lower your blood pressure, improve your sleep, reduce pain. Is that true?
I think that there's a variety of answers to that. I think that in the short term and in a very simply applied mindfulness way, there can be benefits to that. But at the same time, in the monastic setting, in Zen, there's something called sesshin, and sesshin is a more intensive period of meditation. You could sit for meditation for 40 minutes at a time with 5 to 10 minutes of walking meditation in between. And you could do 8 or 10 sessions of that during a day. This meditation can last for a week. Some places do that longer. Um, in in some Buddhist practices, people will take a year to go and be supported in a center where their meals are prepared for them, and they spend their days meditating for a year. And so, in this kind of setting, in sesshin in particular, this month-long or week-long kind of intensive, many people have a drop off in their ability to sleep. They have an increase in some phases of it. Well, they'll have an increase in anxiety, and it can be that um, when we're really allowing our mind and our feelings and our emotions to be what they are, sometimes things come up that we really have to deal with, and they are powerful forces that can pull us this way and that. And so, for some people, they will reduce their sleep to a few hours a night during these more intensive periods. And so something that could benefit sleep for one person in one context could remove the ability to sleep for another person in another context.
Right. When you say that, I'm cognizant of the fact that I have chronic fatigue, and so I spend my day exhausted. I spend my day staying awake, and sometimes by the time I get to the nighttime where I'm supposed to be sleeping, it's like my body and my mind have forgotten. I've been so focused on staying awake, they have forgotten how to in fact engage in sleep. And so when you say that, it makes sense of what I go through sometimes. Anyway, I could be wrong in drawing those two things together, but that's where my mind goes. It sounds like there's a lot of benefits to mindfulness and meditation, like stress reduction, regulation of your emotions, your nervous system, perhaps being able to concentrate more by reducing distractions in your everyday life. Your physical health can benefit. We need to talk about some of the cons, because that's one of the things where we started talking this conversation between Alan and I is, what are the cons? Because I've always heard of meditation as mindfulness as just being a positive thing. And it didn't occur to me that sometimes it's not, and it actually has some consequences for people. So when we come back, Alan is going to talk with us about what some of those cons are. So we'll be right back, folks.
Eoch Tanuyap, Quiget Yuans Quinsna. Hi, everybody. My name is Quiget Yuans. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation and the Yagalanas clan of the Haida Nation. You're listening to Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We live, work, play, and broadcast from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, speaking with Alan Murdock about meditation and mindfulness. So Alan, when we were just talking here, we were talking a lot about the benefits of meditation and mindfulness. And as I said, I've never heard that there could be problems with it until very recently. And so I'm very glad that you're here to talk with us about how these two things that have so many benefits to it could be harmful for some people. So can you talk about how that develops? How does something that seems so good can have something so problematic with it?
Absolutely. And I put a caveat on our previous segment when we were talking a little bit about, the benefits. And I said Soto Zen has kind of this potentially different approach to things. And there are a number of teachers in Soto Zen that say Zazen or meditation is good for nothing. And what does good for nothing mean? One of them, so some people have said, oh, well, you can strengthen your hara, and your hara is like in your abdomen, just below your belly button. And some cultures believe that this is kind of the root of power. Your power, your strength comes from your pelvis, your body, and your essence comes from that. And if you do meditation, you can strengthen your hara and you're going to be stronger. It's going to help you in business. It's going to help you be a more powerful person. There were times in Japan where the samurai merged their political system with the religious system of Zen, and so these concepts of utilizing the meditation to build strength, build capacity, and build power were components of that philosophy. In Soto, the idea is that meditation and enlightenment, or just discovering the truth of the reality of the world and the universe, is a slow process. You basically steep in it like a tea bag in water. And your experience of it, you dip the when do you call it water and when do you call it tea? You dip the tea bag in there, and the first time it's dipped in, it starts to the evanescence of the tea starts to penetrate the water, and almost immediately you can't tell the difference between them. So where does enlightenment come from? Where does, when does it start and when does it end? Is there a barrier between unenlightened and enlightened? These are the kinds of questions that get raised in this kind of philosophy. And the idea of Zen is good for nothing is that the meditation is not done for a purpose to become a better person, or it's to discover who we are and to be ourselves. And there's a lot of questions around like what that really is, and it takes just time to experience and figure out. So it's kind of a slow objective. There is an objective, but the objective is held back. We're not chasing enlightenment. We're simply experiencing what is and figuring out through our humanness and failures how we get there. And so I think some of the sometimes the negatives can come out of utilizing this kind of practice to try and get to an objective. Like, is the person sitting next to me closer to that objective than I am? And, there can be competition that can build up and those different kinds of things. But I also think that this kind of presence can, for some people in some circumstances, can go a different direction rather than that calm, like fluid process of figuring out who we are. for some people, and in my experience, there have been times where anxiety and challenge of like internal things became larger and more intense instead of changing. Like if I sit down and I meditate and I say, oh, well, I'm a little bit anxious, and now my anxiousness is changing and I'm bored, or and my boredom is going away and I'm finding myself to be very aware, or I'm sitting and I'm comfortable and then it's uncomfortable. And so, or I'm uncomfortable and I keep sitting and it becomes comfortable. All of these are instances of transformation, but in some instances, and the fluidity of experience, and the idea that everything is not one fixed thing. I think that's kind of the experience of humanness in and the universe, basically. And I think that when somebody has an experience where they meditate and the anxiety increases and increases and increases, that is a negative space, and it's an indicator that it's time to step away and do something. There are other techniques for dealing with things when the pressure becomes worse.
Right. One of the things you said in there is that it's about finding yourself or becoming yourself. And I think we live in a society that really doesn't, well, I can't say this as a blanket statement because some parents do this automatically, but so many of us are not taught as children just to be ourselves. We're taught to do the right thing, say the right thing, go to the right school, all these things that we're taught to do outside of being ourselves. So the idea of finding yourself or being yourself is not always an easy one. And if what you're doing in meditation and mindfulness is bringing people to something that they haven't necessarily seen before, that can definitely increase anxiety and all of that stuff. Does meditation and mindfulness then bring up issues from childhood, like childhood abuse? You yourself are a victim of child sexual abuse. Does meditation and mindfulness bring this up? Is it something that maybe people weren't expecting to have to deal with and then are dealing with it?
Yeah, I think that there are times where if an issue has emerged, and we don't know how to deal with it, and we don't have tools to deal with it, and we start to meditate, and we hope that the meditation allows us to kind of get through it or get past it, but it's not going anywhere, and instead the pressures are becoming bigger around that particular topic. I think that can be a problem. There's research into like dissociation, and meditation is in some ways can be dissociative, because we can have these big experiences of being at one with the universe, of body dropping away, of having other types of experiences besides those that we would see with our eyes, hear with our ears, smell with our nose, taste, touch, all of these things. There's even there is a chant that we do every Sunday that addresses this in Soto Zen, that suggests that there is a space beyond our senses, that is a universal space. And so those components of Zen can be dissociative. And then if an individual has a dissociative experience because of trauma, how do they work with that in relation to meditation? Sometimes meditation, Jamie Merich, who does work with dissociative identity disorders, and OSDD, talks about circumstances when people who are on a broad spectrum, not just with those conditions, but with any dissociative condition, meditation can get them too close to the thing. They use dissociation to get away from the trauma. Dissociation has become an important survival tool. And so if we're facing trauma, and instead of being present with it, we dissociate, all of a sudden telling somebody, oh, you've got to get closer to that trauma, you're putting that person under a lot of pressure. And if a person can't do it, if they're dissociating when they're trying to be present with it, and then somebody says, oh, well, you really should be able to do that more. It can be bypassing. We can bypass the actual real experience that the person is having. We can put the blame back on the survivor for not being able to do this meditative practice. These are the kinds of circumstances where spiritual practices can start to blame the survivor or bypass the survivor's real lived experience. And it's important that we don't do that. We know that there are modalities that can work within therapy for these different kinds of techniques. But somebody who has a background, because therapeutic practices have taken on some of these meditative things, sometimes practitioners will encourage or push that on a patient when they are, when it's not beneficial to that person.
Yeah, we have of course, it's not every society, but certainly one I grew up in, where your the test of whether or not you have healed from your trauma is whether or not you can be normal and like everybody else around that trauma. So we really do encourage people to not be themselves, so that they can be perceived as normal and okay. So I like what you're saying. So how does somebody know when they are experiencing the negative response to meditation and mindfulness?
I think there's two components to that. There's the component that that we as people who might take on a meditative practice can look for, and that could be like it's increasing anxiety. I feel like I'm fighting myself. I feel like I am like my trauma is getting worse rather than, like I'm trying to meditate and I'm trying to like be present, but I'm not able to be present, and I'm just tuning things out or going away from my own experience. Or I'm starting to have like an altered mental state. Those would be things where if I'm capable of recognizing it, then I, as a person doing that practice, could say, hey, wait a second, I need to step back. Another component of this is people that teach meditation, whether they're in a therapeutic environment. I went to a therapy place that had a little meditation room and was very Eastern philosophy oriented. So there's, of course, centers where meditation becomes a tool within the therapy, and the therapist needs to be able to observe and say, is this person dissociating while they're meditating? Are they starting to so for me, when I've had dissociative states because of facing trauma or triggers related to trauma, some of the things that I observe in myself is my speech starts to slur. I start to slow down. My limbs start to feel heavy. I start to feel like I'm walking through, thick mud or things like that. Those are the kinds of things that I would experience that would say, hey, you're not quite in the right place. And so practitioners can look for that because it's not always on the patient or the meditator to recognize that. That could go for teachers of religious traditions as well. Like, are they observing what's going on with the practitioners? It could go for the therapists and individuals within that kind of framework also.
So what you're saying, if I'm getting this right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that as you're meditating, and I'm just going to use that term, and not mindfulness, because I think what you're talking about is meditation. So that as you're meditating, you're describing, your speech is slurring and your muscles, your body, your limbs feel heavy, and all of those things that we can talk about being symptoms of dissociating.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, some people don't have those symptoms. Some people are just gone, so they
Yeah.
don't have anything. But really what it's saying to you at that point, the reason your body dissociates, whether your mind dissociates, is because you're reaching material that is too overwhelming for you at that particular moment. It might not be tomorrow or the next day, but at that particular moment is too overwhelming, and your brain is literally protecting you by taking you away from it.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is, say, a trauma survivor, is trying to meditate, is experiencing dissociation, what do they do then? How do they, if they want to continue being somebody who meditates, how do they bridge that place where they're dissociating to where they can continue on in that meditation practice?
I think that the first step is to make sure that you are able to step back and step out of situations that are causing that. In some traditions, it might be perceived that going into these states is a positive, and that to get to the other side, you have to keep going and break through. And I don't think that is the case. There are individuals who have thrown themselves off bridges and died. There are people who went out into the wilderness and tried to live in a cave and just froze to death, or things like that. And I sent you a couple of articles kind of detailing some of these stories. They're out there, and I think there's conversation within the religious meditative communities, as well as some of the therapeutic and mindfulness communities about this topic, about how do we handle this. Somebody's come to the meditation center and now they're being disruptive or becoming weird. Do we just kick them out, or how do we help that person come back to a normal state? So sometimes people will go into these things, they'll go into a week-long intensive meditation. They've never done that before. And all of a sudden they feel like they're on top of the world and they can fly and they go ready to go jump off a cliff. And that, that is an extreme version of what I'm talking about. But I think that, in the Soto, so if we take some of these traditions where you're supposed to push and go further and break through and get to the other side, historically, if somebody had a circumstance like this, they would be living in a monastic environment with other people. This kind of circumstance would be, you would have a community of people around you, and you wouldn't just be going on a meditation retreat and then going back out into the world, or those kinds of things. So you would have a community around you that would be able to facilitate and make choices about how how this is going to proceed. And I think that is very different than the kind of scenario we're in today, where people could join a group online, they could start meditating at home, and you could literally meditate 24 hours a day just on YouTube, following various meditative practices all day long. And so people could get themselves into a situation like this on their own, or within a just an intensive retreat where they just pay for something online, they go to it, and things start getting weird, and they don't know what to do, and the guide doesn't know what to do because they've never experienced something like that before with a student or practitioner. So in these kinds of circumstances, I think just being able, spreading the knowledge that these kinds of things can happen, and identifying tools and techniques. I'm not the person to give anybody a set of tools and techniques, but I think that within the larger discourse, we need to be having this conversation and figuring out how do we work with a situation where this starts to happen.
Do you think it's always true that when somebody starts meditating, that if they are trauma survivors, that material is going to come forward to be dealt with?
I think that that the purpose of this kind of presence is to be in a place where the things that we have to face emerge. And so if and when, so I know that in my life, when I started meditating because I was under a lot of anxiety. Um, and I would have these kind of, I'd go to high school, I'd come home, you'd have all the pressures of working, being around other teenagers, and then on top of that, I had these experiences that I had not resolved. And so sitting down for 30 minutes and meditating, reading some Thich Nhat Hanh book, or something along those lines, was very calming, and it was empowering because it was opening things up.
Hmm.
But I think that I wasn't a truly fully formed person. And one of the, things within meditation is you need a strong self, because the whole goal of this in a religious sense is to break down the self. Like, it's not the I and you, we're not separate. We're all part of this world. We're all interconnected. And so if I'm already like fuzzy in my sense of self, or my boundaries are too strong in one area and too weak in another area, those offsets and those imbalances are going to come up at some point. And for me, it was not until maybe 9 or 10 years after I started practicing that some things started to come up for me. And it was at that point that meditation became more stressful rather than less stressful. And unfortunately, I didn't recognize what that was. So I stopped meditating because I knew that the meditation part was difficult. But what I also needed to do, which I didn't do at that time, was to go and find other resources and find some help around the trauma and to address that in some other modality.
Yeah, it makes all kinds of sense, actually. That if you have unresolved trauma, unresolved issues, meditating to be essentially to become yourself would mean that you have to at some point deal with what is unresolved within you, to come to terms with it and embrace it in a way that doesn't involve pushing it away. So it makes all kinds of sense. And you're saying that for some people who are pushed to continue meditation, or who push themselves, it can end up with very dire consequences for them.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that I think, whatever we have latent in ourselves, somebody who has schizophrenia or some other kind of condition, they're going to be facing whatever is there.
Mhm.
And so I think that, recognizing when things are just a little bit, you know, I don't think it means, run away at the first time that things are difficult. But I do think that it means we need a dialogue around what are the kinds of things that um, suggest bringing in added resources, reaching out for other kinds of help besides meditation. There's a teacher
Mhm.
who started a Zen center in New York State. Um, Named John Dido Laurie. His students have continued the practice there. They have elements of both Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen. And in one of his books, he said, when people came to us, we would, allow them to come and stay at the monastery, and they'd stay a month, and during this time, we're interviewing them and trying to figure out what's going on or what their objective is. And he said, if the student has a focus on like addressing the matters of life and death, and like who we are in the world and who we are in the universe, that's something that we can help with. If the person uh, has mental health issues and they're fighting, these internal conflicts that, or a chemical imbalance, or whatever else it might be, that's not something that we're equipped as spiritual leaders to fix. It doesn't mean that that student can't come back to meditation, but they need to go and find uh, what that scenario is, work with it, and address it to the extent that they can come back. And if at that point the matter of life and death and the spiritual practice of Zen is the right thing for them, then of course they can come and practice here. But we need to take care of these. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. He wrote that book in the 1980s, I believe, and I think that still stands today.
Yeah, it's kind of like staying in your lane. And, anybody who's in the helping profession really needs to stay in their lane and not operate outside of their own expertise for sure. I think that's basically what you're saying there. So if
Mhm.
somebody wants to start doing meditation and mindfulness sort of on their own, being aware that maybe if they have sort of unresolved trauma issues or even trauma issues, never mind. I mean, we can often think we have fixed it all, and then we come up against something and it comes up again. And really, what I'm hearing you say is that meditation and mindfulness may be helpful, but make sure you have a means or a roadmap to help you deal with stuff if it starts to come up.
Right.
What you're
And I
saying?
think, yeah, it is what I'm saying. And I think the other thing is that a lot of times people will come to spirituality looking for a spiritual solution to problems that could be elsewhere. So sometimes
Mhm.
people will, look to solve their, digestive problems with meditation, or they will try to, fix their spinal alignment by sitting up straighter, and meditation offers that. And so, so I think, meditation can be a part of addressing some of these things, but, it's, um, but these things are not just a spiritual problem. Some religious practices kind of trade in trying to solve psychological things and spiritual things at the same time.
Right.
And I think that's where it may be very valuable for practitioners to identify um, elements that are separate from one another rather than elements that are joined together.
Right. Thank you, Alan. This has been very helpful and a lot of information. And I think people are going to be able to take lots out of it and run with it. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today to talk about this.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We'll be right back, folks.
How can you protect your keys? Simply attach a WarAmps key tag to your keyring. If you lose your keys, the WarAmps can return them to you by courier for free. WarAmps key tags, they're free and they work. Order yours at waramps.ca.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Cult Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm talking with Charlene Hellson, who is been on our program before, but I'm going to hand it to Charlene to tell us who she is, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about. Welcome, Charlene.
Thank you, Bernadine. So, yes, my name is Charlene Hellson. I'm from the Siksika Nation, which is part of the Blackfoot Confederacy in Alberta near Calgary. And my grandfather is from the Gaina Reserve. So I've got, it's all Blackfoot, but I'm very proud of that heritage. I've been living in Vancouver for the past 10 years. My background is in the arts as an actor and as a poet, and I've also written some short plays as well. So I'm looking forward to doing more writing in the near future here. And my background, my academic background is psychology and anthropology. And my career has been as a clinician, a manager, and support worker, not in that order, in Indigenous mental health. So currently I'm working at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of BC here in Vancouver. And I am an Indigenous patient navigator. So I support and provide guidance to Indigenous people who are submitting complaints about their physicians or surgeons to the college. I also wanted to say that I'm very honored to be here on the Coast Salish homelands of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I am very humbled to be here, And I just want to acknowledge that these are sacred lands. They are very healing lands. And I also want to acknowledge the great numbers of the Coast Salish people that were here before colonization and how their longhouses were dismantled to build the original city of Vancouver.
So you're not here as speaking for the College of Physicians and Surgeons in that role, but you are here as somebody who is going to talk with me about trauma and sort of the impact of trauma. And it came out of a Facebook post where people who are traumatized really don't want to be told necessarily that they're strong because of it or because of the trauma. We it's like I mentioned to you, telling somebody who's in a wheelchair that they're so brave when being in a wheelchair has nothing to do with being brave. And surviving trauma doesn't necessarily have to do with being strong. It has to do with something we had absolutely no power to prevent. And we're just trying to survive. So, so tell us, you've had your own experiences of trauma.
Yes.
How do you experience trauma in that way?
Trauma is like that chaos in the mind that you try to quell, and sometimes you're not sure where it's coming from. In my life, there are traumas that I am well aware of and well informed of, and have done some work around, like residential school trauma. Learned about it in university, and it helped me understand my mom, helped me understand myself, and I was able to do some work around that. And I can, say that I have a good relationship with my mom today because of the work I've done. And then there's the trauma that sort of lay in the depths of our psyche and direct everything that happens in our life, but we are not conscious of it. We're not thinking of it. We're just, I'm saying we, but really it's me specifically. I'm speaking from my own experience. I'm not going to speak as a clinician, because that's a whole other language. But and I've learned from, working with counselors, and I've learned a lot from my good friend Riel Dupuy Rossi, who has taught me a lot about trauma and how to help yourself through it. So trauma is like a little monster almost, or like our golems that lay in the depths of our psyche, and we're not conscious of it. We're going through life, but not realizing that everything that I do and all the decisions I've made have always been because of it, in response to it, or running away from it, or being too weak to fight it, like dark thoughts, dark things, and then always moving towards the lighter things in life. I think working has helped me a lot to keep me busy and to have a good life. But as I've gotten older, to me it's felt like I told my therapist, I said, after discovering this trauma that rose up through my psyche and then repeating in my dreams, where I'm waking up, with the typical, symptoms: racing heart, shortness of breath, in a panic, but also in fear in response to what was in my dream.
Right.
And I was able to discover what that was. And as I talked to my therapist about it, I said, today I realized that I have been wearing a shawl of pain.
Mm,
And, that was the best way I could describe that trauma, how it manifests in the body, but, that heaviness, that pain that comes from wearing this very heavy, heavy shawl of pain. It's like lead poisoning my blood,
mm,
and in the sharing and discovery of the trauma, not necessarily healing from it yet, but it lightens that shawl. Like you can take it off, and I can take it off. I tend to talk in the yous when really I'm just talking about myself. But I discovered I can take it off. I can lighten that load a bit and deal with the rawness of that trauma and be aware of what's going on and what I'm dealing with. But when you don't know, and I didn't know, I look back on my life and I'm like, I reacted this way. I made this decision. I made these mistakes because of this trauma
right.
that sat deep in my psyche. So that's how I would describe it for me, for my experience. Did I
Yeah.
answer your question?
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, you did.
Okay. Okay.
And
Thank
you're
you.
reminding me of how um, when we're traumatized, often the people who are traumatizing us are reframing it. This is okay. This is what
Mhm.
I'm supposed to do. This isn't a bad thing. You were blah, blah, blah. And so when people who
Mhm.
are bigger than us or stronger than us are reframing something, we don't necessarily take it in as trauma. We take it in as an experience, but we don't necessarily label this was a bad thing that happened to me. And so trying to
Mhm.
resolve it sometimes involves having to reframe this thing. But then also the other thing that happens in our society that just infuriates me is that we live in a society that has all these norms. And so when you've
Yes.
been traumatized and you have responses to trauma that are completely normal because you've been traumatized, right? You are
Mhm.
distrustful, you're
Yes.
worried, you're trying to do more things to keep yourself safe. The rest of
Mhm.
society often will look at you and instead of saying that's a normal response to being traumatized the way you were traumatized, they say that is neurotic and you need to go and see a therapist.
Yes.
Because what we've done is we have framed normal response on, say, a cisgendered white man, probably for the most part, and if not a man, the white cisgendered woman, as being normal. And therefore, healing is always about behaving like that person,
Mhm.
having the same responses as that person. And anything beyond that is crazy or nuts or psycho, or you need help with that or whatever, rather than recognizing you have an exact right to feel exactly how you feel because of what somebody did to you. So let's work on that instead of pathologizing the trauma. And that's partly what you're
Exactly.
talking about there. So
Mhm.
when you talk about nightmares coming back, I mean, what you're defining there is post-traumatic stress symptoms,
Mhm.
and probably chronic post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Um, it was amazing when because I couldn't figure out what was wrong. It was always the same theme, and there's a lot of fear, terror, and I would always approach it like, oh, I was dreaming about my daughter or my granddaughter. I better do what I can to keep them safe until my trauma therapist friend, a two-spirit Mohawk person, Riel, said, I think that might be you, Charlene. That's you.
Mm,
And so I began to realize that, yeah, I put myself in that picture. And when I spoke to my trauma therapist, I'm saying, I've been having this dream, and no one can seem to interpret it for me. And he goes, well, If the characters in your dream could speak, what could they say? And, or what would they say? And as soon as he said that, it became like this experience that I had, sort of like almost like when you see in sci-fi films, one image moving over and placing itself over on top of another image, and the whole image, it was like, there it is. And that's what happened.
So once you were able to do that, did the dream stop?
They did.
Yes.
They did. And I've always had this part, sort of around my shoulder blade on my left side. It always felt hot and itchy and painful at the same time. And I was always trying to relieve it, like doing yoga moves, getting massage guns, nothing worked. And I just realized 2 weeks after the dream stopped that I didn't have that anymore. And
right.
It wasn't anything that the therapist enacted upon me. Sometimes we expect the therapist to do the work, but we are the ones that have to do the work. But it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you more peaceful. It helps you to live with less pain. And if you had to measure that against like what you're describing, the ideal way to behave, and it's this patriarchal figure of colonial society, that you would still find pain, you would still find sadness and darkness, but maybe you've alleviated that one thing, that one area. And for us, for people who have experienced trauma, that lightening just feels so great.
It does.
Even if you're not, at a place where you would hope to be in life, with that ideal image of how to be and what to be. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that's true about trauma, especially if it's been extensive or long ongoing trauma, and you're dealing with chronic post-traumatic stress, there's the idea of being done or cured. Not that that's a right word.
Yeah.
Or fixed, or whatever we want. We go into therapy hoping that we'll become normal again, but the truth is that trauma never leaves your body. I mean, it does, in that it stops impacting on you in negative ways, because you can process it in a way that doesn't do that anymore. But you will always be that person who experienced that trauma. You're just going to be that person who experienced that trauma and moved through it and became a whole person who has access to all your emotions and all your experiences and all your feelings without having to change them to cope. Well, thank you, Charlene, for chatting with me. I know it's your lunch hour. I hope you still have time to eat.
Yes.
And oh, good. And I'm sure I'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.
And we'll be right back, folks.
Oh, you hear this? A lot of people call this rock and roll swings. This is done with the, let's see, with the left hand, yeah. And the right hand fits in with something like this here. Here we go now.
Yeah, it's called rock and roll, and you can hear all about it on Rock Talk. Discover the hidden but enchanting side of the music. Friday mornings at 9 o'clock.
Oh, if that isn't enchanting, nothing is. Go ahead, kids. Dance. Go crazy.
And that's our show. My thanks to Alan Murdock and Charlene Hellson for sharing their stories and their knowledge with us today. Music was by Sherry Ulrich, and to you, our listener, thank you for joining us. Stay safe out there. You've just listened to Rethreading Madness, where we dare to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program, or want to share your story, or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.